Shwmai, a croeso i rifin arall o FCTV.
Welcome to another episode of FCTV.
Heddi fyddwn ni'n ffocysu ar y diwydiant laeth, sector sy'n agos iawn at fy nghalon fel mab i fferm laeth yng Ngheredigion. A cofiwch, os nad ych chi wedi gwylio rhai o'r penodau blaenorol o FCTV, yna ewch nôl i'w gwylio eto pan gewch chi gyfle.
Yn y rhifin yma, byddwn yn ymweld â ddwy ffarm sydd yn gwthio'r ffiniau ac yn ceisio edrych ar ffyrdd o wneud i busnesau yn fwy phroffidiol a gwydyn i'r dyfodol.
Yn gyntaf, fe fyddwn ni'n ymweld â Moor Farm ger lle mae'r rhys Davies a'r teulu yn ffermio fyny.
You're at Moor Farm in Holywell, which was an ex-council dairy farm, which is farmed in partnership with myself and my parents. So 8 years ago we managed to, and we were fortunate enough to buy the farm and 27 acres from the Flintshire County Council, and then we've continued to rent the other 73 acres on a farm business tenancy, and there's about 9 years left on that tenancy. We're also renting 40 acres down in Whitford, which is about 5 minutes away. That's silage ground in the main. And there's also near the estate that you've driven through, there's another 50 acres surrounding the estate. That is young stock grazing, silage, haylage, sort of ground. This year has been used for grazing and milkers as well, due to the weather conditions. And also we're fortunate enough to rent some, from around April to October, between 10 and 30 acres from next door, which is accessed by 2 gates. So we don't have to go through Holywell carrying silage or moving stock. Yes, we milk just over 100 cows here on a spring calving system. We've been doing that since 2009. Over the years we've tried to tighten the block, so we're down to about 8 weeks. This year we had hoped to do a 6-week block, and we'll still try and aim to do a 6-week block going forward, just depending on how the season goes. We rear then, we keep all our own replacements, so we rear 46 this year R1s, and we've got 43 bulling heifers or in-calf heifers. So those all stay on the farm, and we try and manage them outside as much as we can, depending on the weather. In terms of staff, well, I'm here full-time. My father, Dave, he does the milkings at the end of the week, and we've got Sean, who comes for 3 days a week. Julie does the calves when we're calving, and the R1s, feeding them before she goes to work. And then we had Bethan, who was here from Clysfassi, but she's to do some supply milking, and she's in New Zealand gaining some valuable experience there this year. So that's in terms of the staff. And the milk goes to Arla on a grazing 360 care scheme. So yeah, there's a bit of extra paperwork and some hoops you have to jump with that, but in the main it promotes animal health and welfare, and it's something quite keen on doing so here. So that's the in terms of the structure of the farm and the staffing, and the land, I should say, is quite heavy. I forgot to mention, it's quite heavy clay loam, so this year's been quite challenging, grazing early in the spring. And also the paddocks haven't really recovered. I've spoken to a few people who said they've had a heck of a good grass growing year, but they're the ones you normally discuss about, when the land's been burning at there, so it's, we're the other side of that coin. It hasn't sort of picked up for us at all, and it's to the point where we're measuring, we do try and measure weekly, but it hasn't really kicked off properly. It's only now that you feel as if there's grass on the farm, to be honest with you.
As part of our network of farms, Moor Farm has had a number of different what we call baseline reviews conducted here. So that includes things as a business review, but also to do a carbon footprint assessment of the farm. So this wasn't something new to Rhys, it's something that he's required to do through his milk contract, as may some of you here today. So I'll just talk briefly about what we've done in terms of that and just an insight as to some of the results. So in this assessment, what we did was to capture data from last year, so 2023, to look at the farm's carbon footprint for that year. And essentially the data that we were gathering were very similar to the data required for the business review. So broadly speaking, split to 3 categories. Land and crop, so information about the land here on the farm, how the land is managed, how much of the land is used for silage production, how it's grazed, all sorts of things, any inputs, fertiliser, manure, etc. The second category being the livestock, so detailed information about the dairy herd here in terms of performance as well as numbers, any ingoings, outgoings from the farm. Any feed, any bedding bought in, those sorts of things. And then thirdly, any fuel or electricity used on the farm. So here we have the results for the carbon footprint of Moor Farm for last year, just focusing on the greenhouse gas emissions to start off with. So there's a figure over here that you probably won't be able to see, the whole farm greenhouse gas emissions, which equates to just over 900,000 kilogram of carbon dioxide equivalent. So what that means is we're measuring the 3 main greenhouse gases, methane, nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide. They're all then converted to what we call this carbon dioxide equivalent, so that they're all comparable to provide a figure of the greenhouse gas emissions produced on the farm for that year. So that figure is relevant to Rhys and the family here at Moor Farm, but is not comparable with any other farms. Then in the red over here we have the dairy enterprises greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram of product. So this is a figure that can be compared with other farms, given that you're comparing farms that are using the same carbon footprint calculator. So here the results for Moor Farm were 1.07 kilogram of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of product, and here of course being a dairy herd, that is kilogram of fat and protein corrected milk. So that may mean something to some of you, not to others, but in terms of how that then compares, well, we used a carbon footprint calculator that is widely used and has been used across the UK by a number of farms, and so that allowed us to give a comparison with other farms, and that figure for Moor Farm is below the average. So the average is sort of 1.2 kilogram of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram product. So good news for the farm here in terms of their overall performance. How is that then split out? So this graph, and you can have a closer look at it, I'm sure we can take it back to the shed possibly afterwards if anybody would like to discuss it in a bit more detail. So this graph is that 1.07 divided by different areas of the farm. So a large proportion of it is feed digestion. So as you would expect, methane emissions being produced by the stock. The blue is manure management. So David touched upon quite a few things relating to management and control of ammonia emissions, but it's very similar things in terms of nitrous oxide emissions, which makes up that blue over there, fertiliser in the orange, and then purchased feed, the green. So maybe as he sort of maybe expected here for Moor Farm. So going forward in terms of things that can possibly be done to further reduce the farm's carbon footprint, well, Moor Farm's in a great situation to start off with in being quite efficient in terms of the farm carbon footprint. And we've heard already this morning about the sort of the Rhys's genetic interest and how they're looking into different genetic options. And that's something that could potentially help to reduce the farm carbon footprint. So looking at options to maximise or improve feed efficiency. So I was having a chat with Rhys this morning, and he was saying that He knows some of his cows are sort of smaller cows, so possibly with less, taking less feed in, but they're actually some of the most productive cows in terms of milk yield. So, you know, those sorts of cows are the ones that you'd want more of in your system, really. He was saying there's some sorts of bigger cows that maybe are not producing as much milk. So potentially, yeah, going back to that feed efficiency. So producing more with using less in a way. Felly dyna ni drosolwg y cynaliadau, just an overview of the emissions on the farm, but just to move on very quickly then to the other side, felly ochr arall i'r geiniog, amaethyddiaeth yn eitha unigryw. Agriculture is quite unique in the fact that, as you will all be aware, is able to sequester and store carbon as well as produce these emissions. And that's where Farming Connect's Welsh Soil Project comes into the question. So this is a project that's in its third year by now, where we are sampling soils on farms within our network of farms to look at estimating the carbon that is stored in our soils below ground. So we know there's carbon can be stored in our hedges, trees, as well as our soils. So very briefly, what we've done here is sampled over 50 farms in total by now in great detail to look at the carbon stock within the top 50 centimetre of soil where possible, to look at how the carbon stock varies between different depths, but also to look at farms across Wales where there are variation in terms of things such as climate, topography, how the land is managed, all sorts of things, just to provide figures for the farmers so that we can say confidently we measured this and this is where we're at the moment in terms of soil carbon stock. So we've got some of the results here. I won't go through them in detail, but what we essentially did was to measure the organic matter content in the soil and then also take what we call bulk density samples, which are essentially tell us how much soil is within a known area, so that we're then able to estimate the soil carbon stock in tonnage per hectare. So there's some of the results at the bottom of the board here, and there's another one in the shed to view as well. But we did see sort of, this is data from the farm sampled last autumn, Moor Farm being one of those 15 farms. And the soil carbon stock sort of varied in different fields on the farm, depending on how the fields were managed. In comparison with some of the other farms, I think Moor Farm was above the average in terms of soil carbon stock. But one thing that sort of we have to be careful when we are presenting these results is, as I mentioned, there's some things that is within the farmer's control in terms of how we can build up that carbon storage and sort of provide more organic manures, for example, into the soil to build up that organic matter. However, things such as soil type and the climate will also have an impact on these results, and those are unfortunately things we can't do a lot about. Possibly, Rhys mentioned at the start that the quite heavy soils here, clay soils, generally speaking, clay soils would have a higher carbon content than sandy soils, for example, as you would expect. So the next step really for us is, we've presented the greenhouse gas emissions data here, is that we'll be able to use the results captured in this project for Moor Farm to look at how much carbon is then stored or can be sequestered on the farm to balance against the emissions.
So yeah, we wanted to explore the world of early detection of pneumonia, really. We know classically farmers are very good at knowing the classical signs, your snotty nose, your coughing, your temperature, but is there a way of pushing that one step further? So lung scanning isn't an entirely new concept. It's been used quite a lot in the equine world, in the small animal world, but that's more on an individual level. So for us in the farming industry, we would want to look at it at a population level. So part of this project really was establishing, is it actually practical to be going around scanning calf lungs? And at the end of the day, is there any value in that for the farmer? The project itself consisted of monthly visits. So on that first visit, we would weigh any calves in between 2 and 6 weeks. On that second visit, we would weigh them again, and that's when they would have their initial lung scan. And then following on from there, a month later, if they had a nice clean lung scan on that second visit, we would only weigh them. If they had some lesions on that lung scan, then we would re-scan them just to see how they'd, well, if they had had treatment, how they responded to that treatment, really. So yeah, I believe our outcomes were met. We managed to scan 250 calves, and they were from 8 different farms, 3 of them being spring block calving and the rest of them all year-round calving. So practicality-wise, we found it was a learning curve for Nicole and I, who were doing the scanning. But as we were doing more and more, we got quicker and more confident in doing it, really. So now it probably takes anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes to scan a calf. So if you've got a good handling system, it's definitely achievable and practical to actually do without taking a whole day maybe to scan 10 calves, sorts of thing. So I think it does have value there. So yeah, I thought I'd just give you a quick demo just to show you basically how simple it is to perform, and it doesn't have to be anything too complex. Teresa's got the red yoke on the gate there. We've got one ourselves at the practice, and that made our lives a hell of a lot easier actually. So it meant we could carry that into the pen. It was stress-free for the calves. You weren't messing around, moving them around different groups and whatnot. And we appreciate at this time as well, you might be disbudding, you might be doing vaccines, so it is a stressful time for those calves, so we wanted to make sure we were really limiting that stress on them. As we started the project, a few more questions opened up, really. It was essentially, well, how do we use this data moving forward? How bad is too bad? So if we were seeing lesions, well, is there a chance that through treatment that calf would respond? Or are we sort of fighting a losing battle with it? And what that score means, well, in real life, really, what would we expect to see from a score 3, say? So we were scoring from 0 to 5, 0 being absolutely no lesions, 5 being 3 or more lung lobes with pretty severe lesions. So scores 0s and 1s are considered to be normal. Score 1 is only very, very small changes, and it can be normal just from dust inhalation, and it's nothing to be concerned about, really. So in terms of what we actually found out, it's no shock to you that the clinical cases we were seeing, well, their growth rates were really hit hard. And it is quite satisfying to see that the farmers were very good at detecting those clinical cases, as we thought. The thing we found probably most interesting were these sort of subclinical pneumonias. So for this project, that was basically anything that had a score 2. So they had some clear lesions in there, but they weren't showing any clinical signs, and they hadn't received any treatment from the farmer. So these, I think, are the ones that this scanning is probably more useful for, to try and reduce those numbers of subclinical cases. So pneumonia really is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of clinical cases, because we found for each clinical case we got in the project, we had another 5 subclinical cases. So they're the ones we really need to try and target in a way. And how to go about this is still some questions out there, really. Do we routinely do a whole batch? Do we scan a whole batch of calves and use that data and use that to influence changes? I think the best way it could probably be used is more of a population medicine rather than to determine treatment options for that individual. So say we scanned a batch of 20 calves today, we'd seen a lot of subclinical cases. We then go away. Maybe we change the feeding protocol, the ventilation, the housing, or we introduce a vaccine program. Then I think it would be very useful to go back then and scan the next calves coming through and seeing how those little changes has actually influenced the outcome of those calves. So it would take a bit longer, I suppose, in a block calving system for Rhys. So say we've scanned this year's calves. If Rhys was to change something to next year, well, we don't know the outcome until next year. Whereas for all year round calving, we might scan something this week, have some poor outcomes, change something, and maybe in a month's time we can see the results there. So the results probably would change quicker in your all year round calving compared to your block calving. So are these subclinical cases actually relevant if we're not seeing sickness? So the short answer basically is yes. We found these ones with subclinical pneumonia, they were achieving 150 grams less in growth rates each day. Might not sound too significant, 150 grams, but if you're to change that into practical terms, if your bulling heifers at 14 months, then those heifers on average would be 65 kilos lighter in weight. So it does really impact your age at first calving. And if you were to hold on to those heifers for a bit longer, you might be waiting an additional 4 months before you can serve them. So it does have a real impact on growth rates. Not part of our project, but it has been seen previously as well that subclinical cases of pneumonia can reduce the milk yield in the first lactation over 500 litres. So if we're talking 40 pence, just to make the maths a bit easier, that's £200 a year of potential that you are losing out on. So yeah, I think it definitely has a place to try and tackle those subclinical cases. In terms of our project, we've only just finished scanning our calves and weighing our calves, so we haven't done a full data analysis yet. So Aberystwyth University are going to help us looking at those figures. Is it truly significant? And yeah, how we can possibly use those data to answer a few more questions that we've got as well. And in terms of, yeah, us using it as a practice, I think it probably is going forward using it to assess the group rather than individual cases. It was quite interesting to see that some of these subclinical cases did resolve themselves, and a month later they did go from a score 2 to a score 1. What impact this has on their growth rates is yet to be seen, so it would be quite interesting to follow on with these calves. And yeah, so it might be something for us to have a discussion with Farming Connect to see, is there scope to take the project further and actually follow on from what we've scanned, and seeing how, yeah, this impacts age at first calving and the yield in the first lactation as well. So it would be, yeah, it'd be interesting to follow it on. Once we've collected all that data, we can go delve into it a bit deeper and hopefully have a few more answers, really. So yeah, we'll just yeah, show you on a calf. So yeah, essentially the first step is getting your calf in. The liquid I poured, as I said, is just a mixture of spirit and water. So we are following the rib lines, and we are just sticking our probe in between those ribs. The lungs are actually surprisingly much higher in the rib cage than you think. So we're just going in between those ribs, coming down until we see the liver on this side. She's a good example. So the trickier part really is getting into that armpit there. So you want to go right to the furthest point, and typically the hardest place to scan is where we see most of our lesions, really. So I believe there is a study out there at the minute looking at, can we just scan that bit, and can we use that to reliably evaluate that calf? So it would just take a bit of time really off your scanning time. But yeah, that's exactly how we do it. We do both sides. And then you just take your score. If she's a score 1 on the right but nothing on the left, then overall she's a score 1. So yeah, that's the principles of it really. And yeah, thank you Rhys for being part of the project.
Cofiwch bod holl wybodaeth ar brosiectau ein ffermydd ar gael ar wefan cyswllt Ffermio. Nesa, da ni'n symud o'r gogledd-ddwyrain i Sir Gaerfyrddin, i Fferm Drefach. Mae'r teulu Gibbon a'i staff wedi bod yn bachu ar y cyfleoedd ar gael trwy cyswllt Ffermio, o cyngor clinigau 1 hyfforddiant a sgiliau, ac wrth gwrs fod yn rhan o grwpiau trafod.
Fferm Gibbon dwi, Leri yw'r wraig, croeso i Drefach. Ni'n ffarmo fan hyn tu fas 11 ffarm laeth rhan fwyaf. Mae diadaeth fach o ddefed yma hefyd. Ni'n godro 300 o ddagodro i gyd yn lloian y hydre. Ffarm deuluol yw i. Mae dyn ni un gweithwr llawn amser ar y ffarm a dyn ni dynon yn mynd i odro rhan amser hefyd. Ni'n cadw 300 o ddagodro, maen nhw gyd yn lloian y hydre. Ni'n treol lloian mor dyn na ni'n gallu. Mae wedyn bydd digon o trisiedau yn dyn ôl mewn erbyn dechrau hydre nesaf. O'n i arfer cadw hanner a hanner da yn lloian y Gwanwyn a'r hydre, ond ni wedi mynd nawr achos seasonality llaeth, brisio llaeth, i ni wedi mynd i symud y da i gyd i loian y hydre. A mae'n neud y job yn hawsach i ni, bod nhw gyd yn un grŵp. Maen nhw'n cael eu handlo fel un grŵp bwyda, lloia a'i bridio wedyn mewn un grŵp. Tua 5-6 mlynedd ôl, o'n i wedi mynd lan i tua 280 o ddagodro yn yr hen barlwr, a oedd hwnnw'n dechrau mynd o ddisial arian arno. Felly edrychon ni mewn i codi parlwr newi, a oedd eisiau rhywle i roi trisiedi a da sych yn y gia arno ni, achos oedd ni'n mynd off yn y gia i ffarm arall y bwys. Felly penderfynon ni wedyn i godi parlwr newi a shed newi i'r gwartheg i gyd. Dodon ni 50 point rotary mewn, a godon ni shed cubicles i gyd ar slats i 300 wedyn o ddagodro. Cyn codi neu cyn adeiladu, mae bydd y wraig a fynnau mas i Ewrop i edrych rownd sawl ffarm am wythnos i edrych ar slats, cubicles, parlwr. So, yn yr wythnos ni wedyn penderfynon ni ar y design sydd gyda ni nawr. Amser aethon ni mas i Ewrop i edrych ar y sheds na'r wythnos gorau i weld syniadau, achos welon ni cymaint o bethau newydd byddwn ni'n mynd i gweld yn y wlad hyn. Mae hwn yn copi o beth byddwn ni'n gweld mas ar yr arfordir. Buddsoddiad diweddara yw'r robot wagon sydd â ni tu ôl ni. Penderfynon ni oedd yr hen wagon o da ni gyda'r tractor yn dechrau mynd i ben, so oedd eisiau meddwl am y tu newid e. A o'n i'n gweld amser lloia, oedd ddim amser i dod i seilage mas o flaen y da, tra bod ni'n bwyda lloi amser godro. Felly mae hwn nawr yn bwyda trwy dydd, trwy nos, wrth unan. So mae'n gadael amser yn rhydd i ni cael bwyda'r lloi a godro, tra bod y da yn cael bwyd ffres, mae'n gyntaf yn mas o'r parler. Mae'r wagon yn llanw o dan yr 4 hopper, so mae waniaeth first cut, second cut, maize a whole crop yn cwmpo mewn i'r wagon. Wedyn mynd yn ôl llanw lan gyda blend, minerals, yeast, cymysgu, a wedyn mae'n mynd lawr y shed, pwysio lan fel bod e'n bwyda mas, a wedyn fel bod e'n dyn ôl pwysio lan to, a wedyn fe eithaf lawr i bwysio lan ar ochr arall o'r shed, le mae'n mynd i fwyda tro nesaf. Hwn yw'r peiriant gynta o'r mecyn sy'n yn y wlad hyn, sef Hetwyn o Awstria. Drychon ni ar sawl cwmni arall, a wedi penderfynu mynd am hwn. Felly mae'n gadael lle i godi nifer y gwartheg os mae eisiau. O'n i jyst licio y ffordd o ddim rownd gyda magnets yn y llawr. Sdim eisiau power ar reilen reit rownd y shed. So mae'n cael ei chargio lan off solar, a wedyn mae'n mynd rownd y shed ar y batri sydd gyda fe. Felly mae'n ffordd eitha resymol ar had o bwyda gwartheg hefyd yn lle tractor. Mae'n fel bod ar cruise ship, achos mae da chi all you can eat buffet, 24/7, mae'n ffres o hyd. Sdim seiled dwi'n cael drodi mas 2 waith y dydd, felly hwnnw'n dechrau twmo. Da eraill i bod trwyddo fe wedi pigo'r pethau gorau mas. Wel, mae'r llaeth ni lan le ni byti 5 litres per head per cow per day. Byddwn ni probably lan i wedi 10,000 average le ni.
Dechreuon ni'r diadell defed nôl yn 2011. Plant dath nôl a wy'n swci wrtho tatgu ym Mae'r y dechrau. A wedyn ni wrth gwrs prynu bach mwy o ddefed. Dechreuon ni gyda defed texel a defed mewl i ddechrau. A wedyn ni nôl yn 2015 wedyn ni oedd diddordeb gyda'r bechgyn yn cadw defed Charlie. So brynon nhw hwrdd a cwbl o ddefed Charlie a wedyn ni datblygodd bridio ni wedyn ni i gynhyrchu Charlie pyr a hefyd i gynhyrchu croesad o Charlie a texel. I ni'n gwerthu wy'n tew yn lleol yn Mart yn Hen Dy Gwynar Daf ac hefyd lan i sy'n Merin yn Merthyr. Ond yn fwy pwysig na hynny, ni'n cadw defed mlaen i werthu fel defed i bridio a hwrddod. A gan amla, yn gwerthu hwrddod wedig yr hwrddod croes yn farchnad Hen Dy Gwynar Daf. Ni wedi manteisio llawer ar cwrsau hyfforddi. I ni fel teulu, ni fel rhieni a'r plant, ond hefyd fel pobl sydd wedi gweithio yma. So pan maen nhw'n gofyn i fynd ar cwrs fel trymo trad da ac yn y blaen, i ni'n awyddus i nhw gael y cyfle i wneud e. A hefyd ni wedi cael sawl cyfle i gael ymgynghorwyr mewn, dibynnu ar pa brosiect sy'n mlaen ar y ffarm. A hefyd ni wedi bod ar grwpau trafod. Gweld yn gwerthfawr o rhan yr addysg, y cyfleoedd, ond hefyd fel grwpau sydd yn trafod pethau rhwng ffermwydd a trafod syniadau. Ni hefyd wedi gwneud sawl prawf trwy'r milfeddyg. Ni wedi bod yn gwneud llawer o waith, chymod, ynglyn â colostrum yn llath gyda defed ac yn y blaen. So ni wedi gweld e'n gwerthfawr iawn.
Byddwn ni'n annog pawb i manteisio ar cyswllt ffermio i fynd i gymaint o diwrnodau agored ag allan nhw i gwrdda a'i siarad ei gilydd a i ddysgu lot o bethau newydd. Ni'n beth rhy hen i ddysgu, so mae'n werth mynd i bob cyfle chi'n gallu.
Mae'n bwysig bod ffermwyr hefyd yn manteisio ar addysg personol a addysg proffesiynol a mae cyswllt ffermio yn cynnig hyn. Mewn sawl proffesiwn arall byddwch chi'n cael hyn yn naturiol, ond gyda ffermwyr does dim byd yn hanfodol, ond mae'n bwysig bod ni yn para i ddysgu a bod addysg yn para hir oes yn enwedig tra bod chi'n ffermio. A felly mae cyswllt ffermio yn cynnig hyn trwy cwrsiau busnes, ond hefyd cwrsiau mwy ymarferol a hefyd i chi gael dilyn beth sydd â diddordeb i chi. Mae cyswllt ffermio yn cynnig cwrsiau eang a byddwch chi'n ffindio rhywbeth sydd o ddiddordeb i chi.
A dyna ni wedi dod i ddiwedd ar y rhifyn yma o FCTV. Cofiwch os hoffech fwy o wybodaeth am wasanaethau cyswllt ffermio, cysylltwch a'ch swyddog datblygu lleol.
Ac fe fydd na ddigwyddiadau yn digwydd ar draws y wlad gan cyswllt ffermio dros y misoedd nesaf. Felly cofiwch i gadw llygad allan ar y cyfryngau cymdeithasol ac wrth i'r swyddog datblygu lleol. Tan y tro nesaf, diolch am wylio.
Thank you for watching.